Hi, everybody, and welcome. So in this video, I want to just quickly run through the instructions in Python lab number 4. So that is the document that I have open right now that we're looking at on my desktop. So it's the typical sort of Python lab. In the table of contents, you can see there are some instructions, there's an intro, and then there are 6 questions on this homework assignment. So this lab is going to focus on matrix operations, addition of matrices, multiplication of matrices, multiplication of a matrix by a scalar. So for this lab, the usual plan, which is once you've viewed this document, make sure you save a copy into your own Google Drive, and then you can make some edits and answer the questions right directly in this document. So in this lab, you're going to be working with these 5 matrices that I called A, B, C, D, and F in all of these problems. So here I've typed them out using LaTeX in this text cell, but up top in this very first Python code cell, I import the NumPy library as NP. So anytime I use a NumPy function, I'm going to prefix it with NP. And then I define these matrices. And for anybody that is working on these labs, if you walk away for about 90 minutes, your session is going to be disconnected from the server that Google uses. And so way up top in this corner right here, you can see right now that I happen to be connected. And if you walk away for about 90 minutes, you'll see that there is no green check mark here, and that means that you're disconnected. And it's very easy to get reconnected. You can either choose it from this menu, but the easiest way to get reconnected is to just run a block of code. So if you get disconnected, just make sure you come and you don't see this little green check mark up here. Just make sure when you come back and start working again, before you go to the questions, you run this first block of code. So this is going to import NumPy and define all of these matrices. And now you're ready for the questions that follow. And again, if you walk away, you may need to come back before you start working and first run this very first block of code. And so in this introduction, it just goes over some of the operations that we discussed in the videos for this week, where we can add and multiply matrices in Python. So to add matrices, we have this NumPy function called add. So for example, if I want to add the product of A times X, scalar A times matrix X plus scalar B times matrix Y, then the first matrix I could write as A times X and the next as B times Y. For matrix multiplication, we do not want to use this asterisk, right? That is a different type of multiplication. So when you're multiplying matrices, be sure that you either use the NumPy function dot, which is multiplying 2 matrices, okay? Or a really nice way to do this is just use the @ symbol. This represents matrix multiplication. In basic Python, you don't need any library to multiply matrices. So rather than use the asterisk, the ampersand symbol, the not the ampersand, excuse me, the @ symbol is what we use to multiply matrices. You can choose either method that you want. And then we also went over how to find the inverse of a matrix in Python. And that you could do using the NumPy library, and linalg inverse is the function that can find the inverse. So question number 1 is asking about how can we multiply a matrix and a scalar. And so you can choose any of the matrices that you want up here to multiply by the scalar, and the scalar that I want you to choose would be the number corresponding to your birth month. So for example, I was born in June, so my birth month would be 6. So I can pick any one of these matrices, maybe matrix B. And in this code block below, I just want to enter 1-line code that is going to multiply one of whichever matrix I pick by, in my case, 6, but you pick your birth month and you'll see the output down here. So that's all you need to do in question 1. There's nothing to type in the text cell, just 1 line to enter in the code cell. In question number 2, Now I'd like you to identify two matrices for which addition is defined. And remember, we can't just add any two matrices. So there is at least one pair of matrices out of these five that you can add together. So question 2 is asking you to identify what those matrices are, and then compute the following sum. You're going to take your birth month times one of the matrices and add to that your birth date times the other matrix. So you can add them in either order. I don't really care about that, but you should identify two matrices that you're going to add together. And so you're going to enter that operation in this code cell below. There's nothing to enter in the text cell. Just enter this in the code cell below. Question number 3 is now asking about multiplication of two matrices. So as with addition, matrix multiplication is not defined for any two matrices. So what I'd like you to do in this question would be pick any two matrices for which multiplication is defined. And the order that you do that multiplication may be very important. So what I want you to do first in this text cell is identify which two matrices you chose to compute the product. One of them is going to be the left matrix in the product. One of them is the right. And I want you to enter those matrices here and here in the text cell. So double click on this box and then enter your matrices here first, and then come down to the text, to the code cell below and enter an operation in Python that would compute the product of those two matrices. Question 4 is very similar, but now it's a product of three matrices. So pick any three matrices from the matrices that we first defined up here, so that when you multiply them in a certain order, the product is going to be defined. And so you've got two things to do here, is that's enter the product, the left matrix, the middle matrix, the right matrix in your product, and then come down into this Python cell and calculate the product of those three matrices. You can choose to do that in a single line of code. If you prefer to do that in multiple steps, you're welcome to do it that way. Question number 5 is asking you to identify one of the matrices at the very start of this document, which has an inverse. Enter that letter in the text cell here of that matrix, and then in the code cell below, enter one command that will calculate the inverse of that matrix. And then the very last question, 6, is asking you to identify two different matrices, neither of which is a square matrix. But when you take the product of these two matrices, the product does result in a square matrix. So first enter the two matrices that you're going to multiply in order to get a square matrix, and then compute the inverse of the product of those two matrices. And so here you need to enter the two matrices that you pick first in this text cell, then come down to the code cell, and on this line over here, replace the double question marks with your product with a command that's going to calculate the product, and it won't print this product to the screen. It's going to calculate this product and store it in matrix M. And then in the same code cell down beneath number 2, the very last thing that I'd like you to do is then calculate the inverse of this matrix M. So you'll have to calculate M first, and then down here, calculate the inverse of M. And that's a wrap for Python lab number 4. If you have any questions on the Python lab or anything else that in the class, please don't hesitate to reach out and send me an email or stop by my office hours. Hope everybody is doing well out there, and looking forward to seeing you in office hours.